everyone, and welcome to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. Today, my guest is Veronica Porras. Veronica is the host of Poor Ass Podcast, where guests speak freely and candidly on subjects that dive into how our mental, emotional, and physical budgets impact our daily living and seek to understand if we can live abundantly on an emotional budget. Veronica is also someone I consider a neurodiverse warrior and has had to overcome her own neurodiverse journey like so many of us. So I am honored to welcome Veronica to the show today. Thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to jump into real quick is I got to learn more about this podcast that you have. Tell me a little bit more about it and what your inspiration was for it.
Long story short, I was affected by the 2008 financial crisis. So I was living in San Francisco, and my background is in accounting, and my job has been pretty quote like safe up until that point.
Mhm.
No one lays off accountants, and then 2008 came, and no one was hiring accountants really. So but they were hiring contractors. So I just got into contract accounting, and I was doing that for like 10 years, but it was hard. I almost lost my apartment. I was living by myself. My brother was having a hard time. He moved in with me, so both of us were living in a studio apartment in San Francisco. And he's an engineer. He has a master's in mechanical engineering, and he was having a hard time always getting laid off
Oh, wow.
too.
Mhm.
And I was having a hard time finding work, and I was on unemployment and food stamps and paying rent through my credit cards, and it was hard. I mean, I'm totally giving like the highlights of what happened during this time. And so
It sounds like a lot. It
it
sounds a
was
lot
a lot.
happened during that time.
It was a lot. It was a lot. So I started my podcast in 2019, just thinking about what was going on in 2008. And I was
Mhm.
always like, San Francisco and the state of California, it's very like scam culture economy and culture,
Okay. Mhm.
get rich quick. And, and, but these scams would actually cost people money,
Mm.
their livelihood, like multi-level, like marketing. It's a scam. So anyway, I wanted, no one was talking about, like, I had it in my head about like, how can we live abundantly on a budget? Because
Mm.
all the messages that was communicated to me, being a working professional, getting the house, buy a house. I was renting, so my parents were telling me like, you're burning your especially my dad. He was like, you're throwing your money away. But what do you think the 2008 crisis was? It was subprime mortgages, like
Mhm.
decimating like people's finances. So I wanted to start a podcast that could talk about, hey, can we live abundantly on a budget? And so I started in 2019, and reaching out to people that I know and people that I've met to talk about, can we live abundantly on a budget? And not all budgets are financial. There's physical, of course financial, but there's also emotional,
Yeah.
physical budgets as well. So I started to, even with the people that I do know that are on my podcast, I got to find out a little bit more about what happened in the background with their financial story or personal story or trauma story. One of my guests was she had cancer. I'm like, how did that affect your budget? It's like it decimated it. So just to get like the conversation going of like, what is going on in our society where we place profits over people,
Yeah.
um, and just to have an open dialogue and shed the shame about personal financing. And just because you don't have a lot doesn't mean you're poor, like a poor mentality. And so just exploring like the sensitive subjects of thing those subjects that people don't talk about openly.
Right, because we were always kind of told that not to talk about it, but I'm glad that you are because I feel like so many of us, one of the biggest things that we experience when we're going through, like, going through things like that is that we feel alone. And this is
Mhm.
an opportunity for people to learn that they're not, that there are other people who can relate to what they're going through.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love. Well, let me ask you, thank you for sharing about your podcast. And before we actually move on to that, tell my listeners where if they want to check it out, where they can find your podcast.
You go to my website, vcomedy.com. That's VEECOMEDY. I was doing stand up for 10 years. So I turned my comedy website into my podcast website.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, if people want to follow me, usually follow me on my Porras podcast, PORASS And I'm sure that's in the show notes too.
Absolutely, and they can see it if they're watching instead of listening, it's scrolling across the bottom of the screen too, so they can check that out.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you for sharing that with me, and I'm one of the things I was really intrigued about when you had reached out and we started talking about you coming on the show is that you, like so many other people I know, were diagnosed neurodivergent later in life, and I would really love to hear a little bit kind of about actually, I wanna hear a lot of different things. I wanna hear
Mhm.
about what it was like for you growing up, what school was like, and then eventually how you led to getting this diagnosis and what if things have been like for you ever since.
Oh, um, growing up, my mental health here this is such a strange thing. So I'm adult child of alcoholic, generational alcoholism.
Mm,
I was a child of the 80s, teenager of the 90s, and when it came to mental health access, I remember it's like I my parents did take me to the hospital and if something was wrong, but in terms of like staying on top of that, I don't have that experience. For example, getting a late stage, not late stage, like a later in life
mhm,
diagnosis. Um, in the environment that I grew up with, like those resources were for white people. Like
mhm,
I'm Mexican. If people can't tell, third generation Mexican American, grew up in a Mexican family, alcoholic home where the work ethic was prioritized than the mental.
mhm,
But yet during the 80s, the adult child movement was really taking by storm, and I remember my house being filled with books, psychology books, self-help books, but there was still chaos in the room. Like it wasn't even like helping.
mhm.
So I don't know, sometimes it felt like my parents wanted to get help, but they were also involved in their own shit. So I'm sorry. I'm like, oops, I cussed.
No, you're
um,
fine, you're fine.
okay. So um it's just like a vicious cycle of like, hey, like, so much BS. So um I and just to fast forward like really quick, I'm reading Unmasking Autism by
Mhm,
Devin Price, and they talk about masking. And
mhm,
I'm just blown away by it. Like, was I masking this entire time for 43 years? And I'm pretty well, since July, I've been pretty active on the online groups for autism, and I'm looking for, and even with that, I'm trying to find help. Some groups didn't jive with me because some of them were parents with
mhm.
autistic kids,
Okay.
and that wasn't my jam. I'm like, I need to talk to other queers um, on the spectrum. Like I'm
Mhm.
a demisexual woman. I identify as that. I'm an adult woman, and then on top of that, when I got evaluated, autism in women wasn't looked at.
Yeah. There's not a lot of
So
research out there.
yeah, and I have joined like women adult groups and like queer autism online groups, and there's this other one like an emotional autism
Mhm,
like group. So those 3 groups I like toggle around, and that's been really, really helpful. So rewind all back to when I was growing up. Uh, so it was very like a hard does it family and doing our best, and in the work ethic. I think during the time really it helped. It did what it did during that time. my parents were really into education and
Mhm.
putting all 3 kids, I'm the oldest of 3, all 3 kids through college. So, like, education was a thing and work hard, play hard was a thing. So that was like the fuel and foundation that would perpetuate me in my young adult academics and young professional, after I graduated.
And what was school like
Um,
for you, though, as somebody who wasn't diagnosed when you went through school? What
mhm.
was that like for you?
God, so my hardest subject was math. I
Mhm,
could not get math. English, fine. Art, fine. I excelled in photography. I took photography in high school. That was fine. I was a good student. I've always gotten like A's and B's. When I was in elementary school, I do remember like crying a lot. I think
mhm,
a lot of stress, like emotionally, just growing up in an alcoholic home. Like I'm just a kid. Like how do I process? Perfectionism was out of control.
yeah,
Like, looking back at it, I just normalized it so much, but, now also in 12-step recovery too, so looking back and it's like, "Oh my god, I was so hard on myself."
yeah.
And little did I know I was probably autistic this entire time,
But
but
masking.
masking, coping, covering up, um, who I didn't even know, like, who knew? Who knew that it was autism this
Yeah.
entire time? Um
Now, did you feel like you felt to some degree like, okay, something is here, you just obviously didn't know what it was or could identify it, but do you feel like there was some realization that something is not the same for me as it is for some of my peers?
No, I think the
Okay.
masking was just so embedded and
Mhm.
ingrained that I wouldn't have known it was autism. And I had a lot of misconceptions because of what autism was being communicated to me. You were nonverbal, um, the too much obsessed with a particular subject,
Mhm.
and so I thought that was it. I
Like
thought
the
but I wasn't.
stereotypical. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
stereotypical, you know, that's not to I mean, I didn't I didn't even know that it was like a spectrum
Mhm.
back then. Like what it was back then it was called like Asperger's.
Mhm.
So so that was my that's what I thought autism was. And I wasn't that. I was verbal. I did have friends. I did do okay in school except for math. That was my hardest. Um um I I wasn't quite an outsider. I had some friends, but I wasn't part of the cool kids either. I felt in my experience. Like I've always wanted to be popular, but I never knew like how to do that. Like how do people get popular?
Mhm.
Um
I get that. That was kind of I was the same. I get that.
but I wasn't so like outcast where I got bullied. I did
Mhm.
get bullied when I was in elementary school and and sometimes like I was the bully in terms of like I don't want to be your friend anymore. And like just shut off relationships for no reason. And like
Mhm.
why? And like it wasn't until like I was an adult I would like think about like how I treated people in the past. I'm like, I don't even know why I ended that friendship. She did nothing wrong.
Mhm.
Like what was that? So my relationships as a young adult, they were okay. Um Dating was so stressful. When it came to dating. Dating was
Mhm.
so stressful. I don't understand dating apps. Till this day, I don't get them. I stay away from them. They're so stressful, and I just kind of meet people casually, and if it happens, it happens. But it's very hard.
Yeah.
It didn't when I learned that I was on the spectrum, I was like, okay, and I was looking at the dating, it's like, oh, okay, no wonder. No wonder. Because
Do
I
you
do love my solitude.
I get that. Do you feel like now that you kind of know about your diagnosis and just for those who aren't aware and correct me if I'm wrong, it's autism spectrum disorder and you said inattentive ADHD just so that
Yes.
so the listeners have an idea of kind of where we're going and what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Here's where my ADHD kicks in. I stopped to say that. Now I can't remember what question I was going to ask, right? But let me see. I'll come up with a different question and hopefully it'll pop back up in my head. But we were talking about dating. We were talking about, I got to go back through my head. Isn't that crazy? See, folks, it happens to everyone at any kind of moment. And you just have to be flexible and just hang on and go with it. But I want to know, with that, do you feel like, here's my question. Do you feel like once you were diagnosed and then you got to kind of reflect on your life, that everything started, okay, this makes sense. This thing about me now, I get this. This is why, did you start to feel like things started to kind of fall into place and you had started to have a better understanding of you yourself and maybe why you felt towards
Yeah.
certain things?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I started suspecting that I was really like something's going on. Probably like a couple of years ago when I attended a 12-step autism focus meeting. I've been in 12-step recovery for 17 years now, and this is the first time I've ever heard of an autism focus meeting. So I was interested because I just thought it was cool. I do a lot of service in my 12-step community, and outreach is one of my things, and I wanted to go just to check it out. And so I go to this meeting and I'm hearing everyone shares, and the attendees at this meeting are primarily neurodivergent or on the spectrum. And I was relating in a way that I wasn't in my other co-ed mixed non-focused 12-step meetings. So it was attending that particular meeting where it put the idea on my mind. I'm like, maybe explore this. So, I went to various like websites looking at the characteristics, and some of the characteristics are kind of vague. I'm like, this could be anyone.
Yeah.
But a lot of the characteristics I was identifying, especially when it came to being alone. Like I want to do things alone by myself. And
Yeah, like it doesn't bother you to do that. I get that. In
yeah.
fact, I need it sometimes, or else I actually get more overwhelmed. Like I need to have that solitude at times.
Actually, I prefer it. So, but other things didn't identify with, like with the sensory issues. I didn't have that.
Okay.
And when I got evaluated, it didn't come up on the evaluation that I have sensory issues. So that would throw me off. Like I would go to these websites, I would read what it is, I read the characteristics, I would identify with some, but not with others. But so this was like during the pandemic, and I'm back roommates with my brother, and I would have trouble. Our relationship had difficulty because I would kind of just do things on my own, just not meaning to, and I'm not aware that he's in the house. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like, for example, I'll tell this story. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. So he's taking a shower, and the our hot water container only has so much water, but I'm not making that connection. I just see dirty dishes. And I just see dirty dishes, and it's like, oh, they need to be clean. And I'm cleaning them, and he comes down. He's done. He comes down. He's like really upset with me. He's like, you used up all the water. I'm like, what are you talking? I'm like, I don't understand why you're upset. I cleaned the dishes. And it was like an argument. And then it wasn't until like the evaluation it became like clear of how I conduct myself in my environment. So it takes a lot to understand like, oh, we only have so much water. I can't wash dishes and someone take a shower at the same time because we're going to use up all the water. I just didn't make that connection. It might seem obvious to others. It just wasn't obvious to me. And so that's what started the journey. And
Mhm.
then my last job that I had, um, so this was my first time having insurance, then my first time being an employee after like 10 years of contracting accounting. And the job that I had was not accounting. It was in the position that was in, it was a digital advertising for
Okay.
a podcast platform, podcast publishing platform,
Mhm.
completely different from accounting. And I though that's when the coping skills
Mhm.
weren't working anymore. I would try to follow directions and they just didn't make sense to me.
Mhm.
Um, I would ask questions and I would ask like the same question like again, and my manager would think like, "Oh, I don't understand it." But that's in my view, in my experience, when I ask the same question, that's just how I learn.
Mhm.
And um, anyway, long story short, with that, I came out to my manager that something's going on and it's bigger, and
Mhm.
I need help. And I told my manager and my upper managers that I suspect I might be on the spectrum. I need help. I need to get evaluated. And
Mhm.
it's the evaluation process in itself is really daunting
Mhm.
because I had to find one. Um, a lot of them don't take insurance, but the one that I went through and the insurance that I had, it's like I had to pay up front,
Oh, wow.
and then I would get um, reimbursed according to my plan. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I ended up, and I was also getting tested for ADHD as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I spent over 5,000
Oh my
in
gosh.
evaluations.
Just to find out what you suspected and because you
Yeah,
needed support and help.
yeah. And I'm and so in uh was it in navigating the autism community
Mhm.
space, I'm told that if you are able to get a diagnosis, you are very privileged. A lot of people aren't able to
Mhm.
get a diagnosis. So a lot of them are self-diagnosed, and there's some advocacy going on. Like self-diagnosis is valid. Um, and I'm all for that, I'm all for that. In my particular case, what was going on with my manager who was narcissistic, gaslighting me, and as someone that, um, is autistic, I guess I was autistic this entire time, just not getting the support that I needed. So instead of support, they put me on a development improvement plan,
Oh, jeez.
which is basically the kiss of death.
Yeah.
And I take things literally. I don't pick
Yeah.
up on social cues, and the manager that I had, and I just wasn't picking up the red flags that she was doing.
Mm.
And um in my working experience, like I've always leaned on my managers. So
Yeah.
I was just doing the thing like you lean on your managers. When I told her that I was having difficulty, she changed. She flipped the script. She was no longer the supportive manager that she claimed to be, and she was enabled by upper management to continue her bad behavior. And I told my brother about this and he was really helpful. And
Mhm.
I had a friend who is a retired VP finance, and he's done development improvement plans, and I told him what was going on.
Mhm.
He's like, "Veronica, if you're ever on a development improvement plan, you're out the door. Companies just do that so you won't sue them for wrongful termination." So, but they were telling me like, "Oh, we want you to improve." So I'm thinking like, "Oh, it's like they were saying the words,
Mhm.
we want you to improve, but the energy was
But that.
anything
But my concern is
improvement."
you went to them because you're like, "Hey, I need some accommodations. I need some support because I have this big thing going on and I'm trying
Mhm,
to learn more about it." And
mhm.
their response and answer was, "Well, let's put you on this development plan so that we can essentially shuffle you out the door."
That's basically what happened. I've talked to other managers in that company, and she's not respected in the company at all
Mhm.
by her
Mhm.
peers in management, and they themselves, like, it's not my fault, but
Mm.
it was made to believe, like, I'll give it to my manager, my past manager, like, I give it to her. She's very clever, could spin a narrative, could spin a story like no one's business, and people just believed it. But
Mhm.
when I would talk to the other managers, I'm like, "Hey, this is going on." I'm like, "Yeah, she's a problem. We've complained to the CEO and they won't do anything about it." So I
Now,
knew.
did you have your diagnosis at the time? Like, I mean, was ADA something that could have stepped in at this point in time because of it?
I don't know. I didn't reach out to the ADA during this time.
Mm.
I'm no longer in that position, but it's kind of hard. It was a challenge. I was just trying to survive.
Yeah.
I was just trying to survive. Did my best. Like, I even started and I've never met this woman before.
Mhm.
I was a 100% remote work from home. And so, um, which was good. This is another great way of working from home. Like, if anyone's trying to bully you or discriminate you, it's all documented. It's all on Slack. You could
Mhm.
screenshot these as evidence
Mhm.
if you choose to seek legal recourse. So it's hard to hide. And she was sending me Slack messages like, "I've never seen you so slow. Why are you taking so long?" And really like abusive Slacks. And I would show these Slacks. As part of accommodations, my Zoom calls were recorded. This is another great thing. So her bullying behavior was just like out of control, and wouldn't let me have my style.
Mhm.
Um, and I take things literally. There was an email that came in. um I read it, and I wanted to be sure, like, to confirm. So I sent one follow-up email, and my manager like flipped, like, "Oh, you should have known what the person was talking about." I'm like, "No, I wanted to make sure." So it turned into a thing.
Mhm.
It turned into like, um and and then she wanted to meet with me on Zoom. I'm like, "No, I don't feel safe." I'm like, "I'll meet with you,
Mhm.
but your manager and diversity, equity, inclusion needs to be in the same room as well, but I'm not meeting you, like, face to face." So we did. We had a meeting, and, because she threatened. I was trying to get one of our sessions, I tried to get clarification on a process, and she
Mhm.
flipped. She was being, like, raising her voice, and when
Wouldn't
someone
you
raises
want
their
an
I couldn't.
employee to ask for clarification? I would rather an employee ask me for clarification 100 times, and I will give it to you, than to, let you just kind of go off, and now we have to fix whatever happened. Like, ask for clarification. Isn't that what you want from people? That is what you want from employees, is to ask questions and to make sure.
I don't know what her problem was. She was very, micromanagey, and just wouldn't let me do my job. Um, I like, here's a red flag that I totally missed. I was having a conversation with the CTO on Slack,
Mhm.
trying to get some understanding on the platform that I do my job in, and this platform was built in-house by the tech team. And so I'm talking to the head of the tech team, and I was asking questions. And then my manager butts in and tells me, like, "Oh, you're not supposed to ask so and so these questions. Like, you're supposed to go to me." And me, being autistic this entire time, was like, "Oh, okay." When reality, it's like, "No, let me have this conversation with the CTO. You're not a programmer, he is."
Yeah.
But you can't, like, put her in her place.
Mm.
Anyway, we have this conversation. We have a meeting with diversity, equity, inclusion, her manager, myself, and uh to address I wanted to address her bullying and her behavior. And then she starts crying, like doing the Karen tears and making it about her. She's the victim. And this is recorded on Zoom. They have it.
Mhm.
This last job, I don't even know what they did with them, but it was recorded. And she's just crying. And um I'm like, "Oh my god, this is crazy." Like, looking back in it. But anyway, that was my manager. That was what I had to deal with it. So it went
Mhm.
from like, okay, she's not even being reprimanded. Like,
Yeah.
do you not see these Slack messages? do you not see this recorded Zoom call where she's crying, making it about her? I'm like, she's the one bullying me, not the other way around. I'm just trying
Yeah.
to get understanding on a process, and you threaten my job. Like, she threatened my job. I was asking questions and she threatened my job, like I should have known by now. But I was just following the process. She
Yeah.
didn't have a 30, 60, 90 plan for us. Like, how we were trained was like, oh, you know, learn as you go and it'll be great and we're all in this together. I'm like, okay, I'm just following you. I'm just following the
Yeah.
lead. And then sometimes
Yeah.
it got flipped around.
Oh
And
man.
and plus I was getting evaluated during this whole time. And I was getting evaluated, going through the evaluations for both ADHD and autism, and dealing with the sociopath of a manager. So, you know, and people were telling me like, oh, go to a lawyer, and like, it's not that simple. You know, I say that
Yeah.
too. But looking back, like,
It's
know
not.
that know that you there's options, but when you're in it, it's like, I just want to survive
Yeah.
and get through it. Because if you quit, uh you may lose your unemployment
Right.
if you quit. Because in order to apply for unemployment, you can't quit.
Right.
So
So
it's
you
like,
had to
you know,
endure it.
yeah, so you're just stuck in these systems.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only one. Like, when I was let go, I had accommodations for 2 weeks, official accommodations for 2 weeks. I had my letter from my evaluator.
Hmm.
I had accommodations for 2 weeks, and then they let me go because of performance. Um, and I gave them my feedback, like, having a manager of this type was really hard. She was
Hmm.
abusive, and you know that, and you have the emails. I even tracked down past employees who were on her team and told them what was going on with me, and like, yeah, she did the same to us, and so many, like, bullying them. She treated her team like horribly, and when they left, they told HR, you know, in their exit interviews. And then when I complained, when it was my turn, I came around and I complained. They were
Hmm.
looking at my complaints as if it was like the first time they've ever seen
Dealt.
it. I'm like, and I told them, it's always like, I know that you know that I know that you know that this
Hmm.
person's a problem and you're not doing anything about it.
And that's so disappointing, especially because I don't think that a lot of companies realize the cost that it is to have employee turnover rates, especially in my personal opinion. And I understand I'm a little biased, but I think the people who are neurodivergent have so much to offer companies as well too. Your creativity, the rate that you could work, the way that you see things outside of the box that everybody else.
Yeah.
There's so much potential to give that those are the employees you really want to work with and give some of this extra support to because of what you can potentially get in return from them as being those creative and outside the box types of thinker employees. So I am so sorry
Mhm.
that you went through this. So please tell me there is a light at the end of this tunnel though, and that there's some positivity on the horizon for you.
Oh my god. So, I think the positive thing that came out of is, like, the job that I have now, it is higher paying than the
Mhm.
last job that I had. I've made a lot of other autistic friends, along the way. You know, they were you know, I met them as autistic before I came into my own understanding.
Mhm.
So, I reached out to them. I'm working on a autism series. Yeah, so working on a pilot that I wanna submit for a grant for.
Mhm.
And when I got help, well, when I got my diagnosis, it's like, "Oh, okay, this is why I'm having issues." And then I'm, like, exploring the online sea of information and online groups and learning
Yeah.
more about the autism community, and just being like, a new person, and getting it specifically, like, in my experience, it's like there's niches within the autism community. So
Mhm.
I want to talk to other adults who got diagnosis or self-diagnosis, like, later
Mhm.
in life. Like, those are the people that I need to talk to.
Yeah.
And also talking to other autistic professionals um who have like trouble at work, so I could talk to them. And I'm not the only one. Like, what happened to me is happening to so many other autistics at the workplace: bullying by coworkers, gaslighting by managers.
Mhm.
And I was also diagnosed with oh god, what was it? Major depressive order. Major
Yeah.
depressive order,
Yeah.
which when I was getting evaluated for that, he said, if you're in toxic dynamics, it triggers it even more. I'm like, oh my God, no wonder. And
Absolutely. There is a
I
high
was in
link.
trauma mode. I was in
Yeah.
trauma mode that entire time in my last work. So I wasn't functioning. Like that development improvement plan wasn't about improvement at all. Like I was in a cage and it was just like, let's play this game. And so when they let me go, here's the trippy part. When they let me go, I did get a severance.
Mhm.
I did get a severance, which companies don't even do that.
Yeah.
So during this and I couldn't even prove my manager wrong. Like whatever she said about my performance was the truth. To maintain my sanity, I created my own performance dashboard that I created. So she would say things like, you're performing at 30%. I'm like, okay, that's interesting because my dashboard says 78%. So where did you get your 30%?
Yeah.
So um it was like tips, like if the light at the end of the tunnel and like dealing with narcissistic sociopathic managers, you could
Mhm.
never prove them wrong. Like just know
Yeah.
that.
Well, yeah.
Just know in your heart you can never prove them wrong. You could just ask them questions like, oh, that's really interesting,
Yeah.
because I had a methodology that proved like where my 78% came from. She just had a story and her feelings on how the 30% came from. So you want to talk about neurodiversity, I'm like, facts, like
Yeah.
where are the numbers coming from?
Mhm.
Because it's coming from here, like
Which is
where.
real data, right?
Yeah,
Real data, provable data.
yeah.
So,
Because that was my ask. And so when I even tried to get transferred to another department, because there I befriended some managers there that didn't like hated my manager
mhm,
because
they knew.
of the yeah of and she has done some shady shit to the other managers like too. So I'm like, hey, can you help me out? So um make friends. Like I came across like an online post where the person was having a horrible time and did not want to go to the manager. I'm like, okay, cool. Make friends. I'm sure there's other people in that work that don't like those people that are bullying. Like my enemy is my friend. Like make friends
Yeah.
with those friends.
Yeah.
So it's like if you don't want to go, it's like it's so politics, and that's like really hard for me because I'm like, I don't care about your politics. Like I just want to do my job, and that's really hard for me. That's not a skill that I have.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's important to develop those skills, like make how to make friends, because I don't like work friends. Like I don't like making work friends. That's not my thing.
Yeah.
But that situation just really pushed me to like who my brother calls it spine, and it's not bad spine. I'm not. It's
But
not. It's
having allies, I like to look at it as you
yeah,
have allies, you have people who are in your
or
corner.
accomplices.
Yeah, and people who are willing to support you. So let me ask you that since we're getting close to
Mhm,
the end here of our interview. And
mhm,
typically I usually like to ask, what kind of advice would you give to young adults? But let's kind of focus it this way instead. What advice would you give to someone your age or a young adult who is facing the same thing? It's a new diagnosis, you're in a work setting, you're dealing with this difficult situation, you're learning more about who you are, not as a learner, as a worker, and you're in this impossible
mhm.
situation. What advice would you have? Where would you direct them to go and what to do?
That's a really good question. I'll just talk what worked for me.
Mhm.
So my last job, they had diversity, equity, inclusion, and I reached out to our DEI officer and asked like, hey, are there any other employees on the spectrum? I would love to get to know them. I did ask that in my current job. They won't give me any names because they said it's like, HIPAA or
Right.
whatnot, which I do understand that, but at the same time, like, where are the resources?
Yeah.
Because it seems like when it comes to autism support, the only autistics that matter are the kids with autism. Once they hit 18 and then are adult, it's like, hey, good luck. And that's
Yeah.
just my experience and like what I have observed. Like people could disagree with me, and that's great. That's just like what I'm like experiencing when it comes to support.
Well, if these people
Like,
feel
so,
differently, hopefully they reach out and say in a nice and caring way, "Actually, here are these things," and they're helping you find some of these things instead.
yeah.
So
So I reached out to our DEI officer, and I did get in touch with some employees who are neurodivergent or on the spectrum. My last job had had infinity Slack groups. There was
mm,
one for African American professionals, and
mhm.
I asked like, can we have a neurodivergent like private Slack channel
Yeah.
for employees? And
Mm,
I started that, and it got approved, and it was myself and 7 other employees, and I got
mm,
to express like what was going on in my work. I'm like, "Hey, my manager is like siloing me. Is this like
mhm,
normal?" They're like,
mhm,
"Yeah, no, that's weird."
mm. So you
So
had those allies, you started to develop those allies of and then people who could
mhm,
relate too. So
yeah.
finding people who can relate and be your allies is an important thing to do.
Yeah, I lucked out. I had some really great coworkers, and in terms of accommodations, part of the accommodations was having a training buddy, and I found that my coworkers, they okay, they weren't being treated the same. I was definitely being treated differently.
Mhm,
They were not experiencing the level of harassment and bullying that I was with my
mhm,
manager, but
mhm,
I reached out to one of them, and I wanted them to be one of my buddies, but my manager said no. Um, she said her reasoning was they're too busy and I'm the manager and I know people's workloads. And I'm like, well, this other department that I was friends with the manager, and this manager doesn't like my manager, like how she was managing, like they had quizzes, they
mhm,
had buddies, they had team trainings like to refresh each other. I'm like, hey,
mhm.
this is what this other department is doing, and that would really benefit me. And they're like, no, they're different. That was the reasoning.
Oh, man.
So it's not like I tried. I'm like, look, I
Yeah.
like their approach. That
Yes.
would help me. No,
Yeah.
no.
Oh, man. Veronica, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you went through all of this, but I'm at least happy that you're in a new job,
Yeah,
not with that person anymore. Hopefully that they are giving you the support that you need and that you'll be able to find the success that you deserve to have as an
yeah.
adult professional.
Oh, I was gonna say, what would a tip? If you're really into Excel, like create your own performance dashboard. That would really
Mhm,
help your sanity. That really
mhm,
helped my sanity because I was getting gaslit left and right, and I was like,
yeah,
well, my dashboard says this, and my notes say this, and my notes, job aids, like those are going to be your lighthouse, your light to lead the way. Because my manager was just gaslighting me left and right, and it was so hard to just not believe her, because I
yeah,
believed her. I totally believed her. I believed her of
yeah.
her what she thought about me. I took it as truth, and it wasn't. It
Yeah.
wasn't.
Oh,
Like, don't believe people. Don't
well,
believe your manager.
I'm so sorry. And, so thank you for I mean, it takes a lot of courage to come on and share stuff like this. So thank you for
Mhm.
coming on and sharing your story. I really hope that if anyone else out there is in the same position as Veronica, that you have the strength and the courage and know that you're not alone and that you deserve the right to be supported at work as well too. So Veronica, thank you so much for coming on the Neurodiverse Teacher podcast. I am so grateful for you, for your story, and I welcome you to come back and join me anytime. So thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me. Good luck out there. Yeah, you could reach out to me on Instagram. Happy to um, help what I can,
Wonderful.
or share my story, or listen to the episodes. I am creating some toxic manager episode. I've an interview with upcoming interview with a who also got their diagnosis later in life too. So I'm
Oh,
creating, because of this
awesome.
experience, I'm
Mhm.
creating like I'm pivoting. My podcast is going to take a pivot and focus on
Um,
autism adults in the workplace on a
I think
budget.
that's I think that's fantastic. I think it's definitely needed. So definitely check Veronica's website out. It's www.vveecomedy.com and on social media at Porras, Porass podcast. Thank you again so much, Veronica, and I will see you all next time on the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast.